Hi, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Amber Rose, also known as the Religious Hippie. You can basically follow me on anywhere on you can basically follow me anywhere on my social media platforms, except for TikTok. We already know. And today I have a special guest with us. Today I have Rosemary Mcguire Berry. I am so excited to have her on to discuss her new book, Piety and Personality: The Temperaments of the Saints. She's a lifelong Catholic who loves to read, tells stories, and travel. When she's not homeschooling her youngest daughter, you can often find her with her family, leading intentional pilgrimages to visit shrines and saints. Rosemary lives in Colorado with her family and shares her insights in a weekly travel column. So she's the author of the book we're discussing today, and I'm so excited. I heard you're also working on a sequel right now.
I am working on a second book. It's great to be here, Ambrose. Thank you. Um,
Yes.
yes, I'm working on another book. This one's going to be more related directly to travel. The one that we're talking about today is related to the saints and their temperaments, and the next book will be about saints and travel.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm excited to see that one. When is that one kind of set to release?
I'm still writing it, so
Okay.
probably not
A lot.
until 2026 is what I'm thinking.
Okay, very cool. Well, that's awesome. I'm so excited to kind of dive into this. We were kind of chatting before we pressed record, and I was saying how this has become more of a trend recently amongst Catholics to figure out what temperament they are, and what their main temperament is. And maybe there's like a side temperament that they also have. So I was trying to figure out who I was through the book, and turns out I'm mainly phlegmatic and also sanguine, which are really weird names. But yeah, I'm just really excited to kind of dive into this. Diving straight in, I guess, like, would what I guess what are the temperaments in a way, and where did they come from?
Yes, so Hippocrates came up with these back in the 4th century before Christ, and he thought of them as the four humors. He thought that they were actually related to the bodily fluids in our body. So that's why we have such odd names. The sanguine, he thought, had more blood, the phlegmatic had more phlegm, and he just realized that there were these four distinct personality types, and that made people think differently, made them behave differently, made them even feel differently. So that's where we get the funny names. I don't know why we haven't renamed them over the years. I mean, people have come up with different temperamental systems that they try to, I don't know, morph into a little bit different, but these are really basic. And I find that they are very universal.
Hmm.
So the first one is the choleric, that or choleric, both are correct pronunciations. They are the decisive ones, the dominant, the CEOs, the ones that get things done, see the big picture. A lot of times, motivational speakers are choleric, which sometimes doesn't apply to the rest of us if we're not choleric. We're like, yeah, you work way too hard, buddy. I don't think I could do that, you know. So those are your choleric types. The sanguines are the fun loving, pleasant, pleasure loving, happy, cheerful, always see the glass half full, if not overflowing. They are just, they bring light and joy to life. But each of these strengths has each of these temperaments has strengths and it has weaknesses. So in the choleric, he or she can become bossy and domineering and bulldoze over people. But then on the other hand, they have the strengths of courage and decisiveness and get things done. The sanguine can be ditzy and inconsistent and flighty and even shallow. But on the other hand, they're happy and joyful and positive and enthusiastic. The next one is the melancholic. The melancholic, just by its name, you can kind of tell that, ooh, maybe tending towards sadness. Sometimes people don't want to be labeled melancholic, but it's just the name of the temperament that Hippocrates gave it. And it's because they do tend toward perfectionism, wanting things to be perfect, wanting things to be ideal and just the way they've always dreamed they would be. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes life just doesn't work out that way, right? So their positives are that they're very idealistic and they're sensitive, empathetic. They pay attention to the details to get the details right. So those are some beautiful things about the melancholic. And then the phlegmatic, they have their strengths and weaknesses. The weaknesses are they can be kind of lazy sometimes and stubborn, quietly stubborn, not wanting to not wanting to say anything, but yet at the same time not doing what others want them to do just because they're being quietly stubborn. But on the positive side, they're very laid back and easygoing and likable. People like phlegmatics because they don't have to always be voicing their opinion. They can say, okay, let's do it that way. That's cool. Let's do it that way. They are peacemakers.
Hmm.
So, in the end, they all have strengths, all have weaknesses. And we're usually, like you said, a combination of maybe two. Sometimes people even have three going on. They're a lot of times very busy, active people that have like three temperaments that they're juggling. So, it's just a baseline. It's just something that we're given when we're born that by God that helps us with our mission in life.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's beautiful, and it's so good to be able to also figure out which one we fall into, because then I'm sure it helps us to better know ourselves and to know how we'll react in different situations, to then be able to not fall into sin or vice in certain situations. Because I'm sure that there are a lot of things we're predisposed to based on our temperaments.
Yes.
Like you were saying, the cleric are probably more likely to be argumentative and like push people down. And if you aren't careful with that, you could easily become kind of cold-hearted and just about you and what you want and how do I get there at the expense of others. It's almost a narcissistic trait. And so you have to be really careful of making sure that you stay in the middle, virtues in the middle, of not going too far one way or the other. And so when we look at the saints and what saints specifically fit into certain categories of these temperaments that we could look at. I know they're in your book, but what are like some well-known saints that we'd be like, "Oh, they're chloric or cleric and they're sanguine or something."
Yes. I find it exciting to make that connection between us and the saints and to say, wow, this saint had my temperament. That means that this saint started out with my strengths, but then they conquered their weaknesses of
Mm,
this same temperament. And so I just get excited about that. And I felt that there wasn't a book yet that did this where they told the lives of the saints through their temperaments. So as you were saying, so on the book, we've got right on the cover, we've got Thomas Aquinas. Thomas
mm.
Aquinas is a phlegmatic. He started out with that easygoing, sorry,
No,
peaceful,
you're fine.
uh, peaceful temperament that was then particularly nurtured when he was studying with the Benedictines. At the age of 6, he was enrolled in Monte Cassino with the Benedictines, and they were able to nurture that peacefulness while also helping him to be hardworking. Because of, as we said, the phlegmatics are very peaceful, but they can be lazy if they're not virtuous. So they were able to help him with that. We've got St. Joseph here, and he was another phlegmatic. He was so that he gives us an example of a phlegmatic married man, and he probably had some melancholic as well. We've got St. Teresa of Avila, wonderful, wonderful saint, St. Teresa of Avila, who had sanguine and choleric. So she had that combination of the people person, the positive, upbeat person, and also that leader dominant person. St. Paul, I got to move into camera here. St. Paul, he was a big choleric. Like he was the first chapter I wrote because his temperament is just so out there for everyone to see. And so strong choleric there. We've got Mary Magdalene down here in the corner, and she was a combination of sanguine and melancholic. So she's got that emotional connection. She's very emotional either way. Sanguines are emotional happy, and melancholics can be emotional sad. And so she struggled with emotions both ways. St. Peter, beautiful example of a sanguine, beautiful example of someone who's got all that enthusiasm and positivity, and I'll die for you, Lord. And the next thing, he's denying him. He
Mm.
just had that back and forth, back and forth. Someone called it a Zoom eek personality, that Zoom eek kind of personality. That was St. Peter. St. Thomas More is another married phlegmatic. He gives us another beautiful example of that. St. Therese has the melancholic, the very
Mm.
detail oriented, sensitive, paying attention to all the little pinpricks of life just because it's part of her nature. And there are a few other saints featured in the book, but that gives you an overview.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, and I think it's so cool to be able to then go back and think about the books that I've read about different saints, and figure out, okay, what were they? Saint Joan of Arc, for example, or Saint Francis of Assisi, like just looking at what they have said, if any of their words are written down, which sometimes there are, but mainly their actions, and seeing how they lived out their life for Christ in such an interesting way. And we talked about what I am. I'm phlegmatic and sanguine, but I feel like I have such a deep connection to St. Francis because he is also similar in those ways where I can see myself in the saints in their temperaments, and it helps me understand, okay, this is my temperament. They have the same one. How did they get to heaven through, not giving into the vices that they were maybe predisposed to, but instead, like,
Mhm.
rising above and going further into virtue. What are some ways, I guess, the vices that we see these days, and we kinda talked about it a little bit earlier on, the pros and cons of each one, but what are some of the biggest pitfalls you see in every single temperament? And maybe what are some remedies, that people can actually implement in their lives to combat those?
Yes, great question. So it's like you say, if we are more conscious of where our weaknesses lie, we can fortify. Right?
Mm,
St. Teresa of Avila calls our soul the interior castle, and we can fortify our castle better if we know where the weak spots and the battlements are. And it doesn't mean it's an excuse. Oh, well, I'm sanguine. I gossiped again. Oh, well, I'm choleric. I rolled over everybody again, bulldozed over everybody again. It's not an excuse. It's just knowing where the weaknesses lie. If you have a tendency toward alcoholism, you don't walk into a bar and have that first drink because you know that it's not going to lead to good places for you. But then someone else can walk into that bar and have a glass of wine and it won't affect them. So obviously, there is good and evil that is objective. There are certain things that are evil for anybody, but there are other things that are just more of a temptation. So if we're sanguine, for example, it may be more of a temptation to get pulled into social media in such a way that you're comparing constantly and worrying about people pleasing and, oh my goodness, I lost 2 followers. What happened? What did I say? What did I do? That might be more of a problem for you. Objectively speaking, it's not a sin, but it can be more of a problem for you that could lead down the path of vice. So that
mm,
pretty soon you don't care anymore what God thinks. You're only worrying about your likes and who stopped following you and why did they do that. So that's just like a little bit of a shallow example, but at the same time, it's truth. This is something that helps us to fortify that weak battlement there and say, you know what? I'm not going to look at how many follows I have. I'm just going to keep going. Every once in a while, I'll check in, but I'm just not going to let myself get pulled down that path. I'm doing this for God's glory, not for what people think of me. So that's an example. So in the choleric temperament, like you mentioned, they have that tendency to be argumentative, that tendency to be bossy. So if they lean into the strength of the fact that they can be decisive, that they can will something and it will happen. They'll say, I am going to start this business. I am going to be successful at this. Or I am going to, I don't know, organize my children's chore chart, and I'm going to do a great job with it. They can lean into that strength and say, I'm going to apply that decisiveness to my weakness of running over people. And that's
mm,
what something St. Francis de Sales did. He had that choleric nature, and yet we know him now as the gentle, meek saint. So he used that decisiveness and said, how can I overcome this? How can I stop running over people and having to be the one that's talking? And so he came up with a list, which was the other part of his nature, the melancholic. He came up with a list of, if I meet this person, here's how I'm going to react. If
mm.
I feel this feeling, this movement in my soul, here's what I'm going to do about it. And he came up with a plan. And being a choleric and being a melancholic, he was able to apply that plan to become a really gentle, meek saint so that people think he was maybe sanguine or phlegmatic. But Pope Pius XI tells us in his encyclical about him, no, no, no. He didn't start out that way. He worked to become that way.
Mm,
So that gives us some choleric. Melancholics, they can kind of see the glass half empty. They are particularly prone to discouragement and depression. They can just look at life, look at politics, look at the world, look at religion, and say, "Oh my goodness, the church is in such trouble," or "Oh my goodness, my parish is in such trouble," or "Oh my goodness, my family's in so much trouble." The melancholic will tend in that direction. So for the melancholic, they want to focus on the cheerfulness, focus on gratitude. Cheerfulness is actually a virtue. It
Hmm.
is not just something that sanguines are born with. It is a virtue to work towards being positive, being upbeat, rejoicing, like our Lord tells us in Scripture. So for a melancholic, they have to kind of avoid thinking about all those negative things because it will funnel down for them. Again, a different temperament, a choleric, could look at the negative things and say, what can I do to fix this? And it won't
Mm,
be a temptation for him to spiral down into depression and discouragement. For the sanguine, like I said, positive, upbeat, that's great. They have to work on their ditziness and inconsistency. This is something I've struggled with my whole life.
it's
Um,
hard.
It is, it's hard. We just have so many good ideas, and we're like, "Oh, look, a butterfly. Oh, look, a squirrel." And so making ourselves be consistent by so maybe it's consistency with the daily rosary, maybe it's making it to daily mass 3 times a week or to adoration. So making a schedule and keeping to it would be a very simple tip for a sanguine to try to say, it's not gonna be a very detailed one. For a sanguine, you can't say, "From 1 to 1:40, I'm gonna do this." No, but you can say, "Okay, at lunchtime, on my lunch break from work, as soon as I'm finished with work, I'm going to say the rosary."
Mm,
Or, anchor it to something. The sanguine needs anchoring. So finding something that they can anchor the good deeds to, really helps them. Every Saturday, I'm going to make a visit and, do some adoration, something like that. For the phlegmatic again is the peaceful one, the easygoing, relaxed one, and that's a beautiful gift. We need phlegmatics in the world, otherwise everyone would always be at each other's throats. But
yeah.
there's something but they have to work on that laziness, that inclination to be like, "Ah, that's okay. I'll just do it tomorrow. It doesn't really need to be done." I mean, they can become very complacent in their spiritual life. "I go to
Mm,
mass every Sunday. What more do you want?" That can be a phlegmatic's point of view. So saying, "Okay, what is it that the Lord wants me to do?" Use that inner quiet that the phlegmatics already have to pray, to meditate, to ask God, "What is it that you want me to do?"
mm,
They don't struggle as much with that, "I have to do everything," fear of missing out that some of us have, but they do need to work on, "Yes, but what does the Lord want me to do with my time?" Maybe I need to avoid binge watching so much or even binge reading. Hey, I'm a big reader. I have a house full of books, but I could be tempted to sit down and just read and not get any work done. So
that's
that's just
very
like
true.
a few tips, a few tips.
No, it's so accurate too because since I'm phlegmatic and sanguine, I find myself I'm very optimistic. Like anything and everything could go wrong and I'm like, "Oh well." Like it is it's in some ways a blessing, but also a curse because my husband is like the opposite of what I am. And opposites attract. So something bad happens and I'm like, "Meh," and he's just like, "My life is ruined. Everything's horrible." And then he gets over it and, like, he processes or whatever. But I'm just like he's just like, "Oh, it's actually not that bad." I'm like, "Yeah, I was there, like, 5 seconds ago. Like, I already knew it wasn't that bad, but cool. Glad we're on the same page now."
The
Um
struggle is real. The
it
struggle
really
is
is.
real.
And I feel so bad sometimes because as a sanguine, I don't always understand, like, the melancholic side of things where it's like, "Oh, things are sad, things are doomsday," and he's gotten way better at it now. When we were first dating, we were both, like, really, really struggling in both ways with me, laziness and, just being scatterbrained all over the place. Now I'm a lot more structured and stuff, and he's become a lot more optimistic by just literally practicing certain things. But with relationships and the temperaments, how do you see the temperaments affecting relationships? Are opposites attract? And if you are in a relationship with somebody who's the opposite of you and you didn't know about the temperaments or anything, and now you're learning about it, how do you bring that up to your spouse or figure out how you can also handle their temperament if it gets like under your skin or on your nerves? I know a lot of women text me or call me and they're just like, just found out my husband's like phlegmatic and I'm like caloric and I can't handle that he just doesn't want to do anything all day and wants to relax after work while I'm go, go, go. What do I do? What do you have advice for them?
Oh, I think it's so important in marriage, so important. And first I want to say that if you have married your opposite, there's hope. And
Yeah.
if you've married your same, there's hope, right? Finding out about the temperaments after you're already married, it's fine. It's totally fine. We can work with this. I think the first step is to figure out what your spouse is before you even talk to your spouse about it. Figure out what your spouse is and look for their strengths. Because when we focus on their strengths, we love them more, we
Mhm,
cherish them more, and we appreciate their efforts more. And we can also be a little more understanding of the weaknesses if we're focused on the strengths. So, once again, as sanguines, you and I, we can find the positive. We're good at that. If you're a melancholic, you're going to struggle a little more with this. But look at your spouse and figure out, okay, say my spouse is choleric. Say they have that strong-willed, decisive, bossy temperament, but look at what great leaders they make. Look at how, if it's your husband, look at how he's leading the family and he makes sure we all get to Mass on Sunday. Look how he works hard for the family. Cholerics work hard. They can be workaholics if they don't watch out for it. But if you're married to a sanguine, look at how joyful your spouse is. Look at how positive and upbeat, and how they really take to heart the words of Scripture to rejoice always. Again, I say rejoice, as St. Paul tells us. If you have a melancholic spouse, look at how careful they are to do things correctly and right. They probably have a lot of virtues in there. They might be picky, they might be perfectionists, but they also do things right. If you have a melancholic husband, he's making sure that your car is filled with gas, or he's making sure that he picks up the detergent for you that you asked him to get. If you have a sanguine husband, he probably forgot to pick up the detergent, and that's okay too. He has other gifts, but just looking at the strengths of each one. If you have a phlegmatic spouse, be glad they're not a choleric that's constantly battling with you and arguing with you. Say, wow, it's so nice that he or she is laid back and I can come to them and they're sort of that rock of stability and peacefulness and even temperedness. A lot of spouses are not even tempered. If you have a phlegmatic spouse, you're blessed because of that. So,
mhm.
first of all, finding the strength in your spouse. And then, yes, we have to take a look at the weaknesses, but we also have to be humble about our own weaknesses, right? Noticing that. I just loved your example because, yes, as sanguine wives, we're positive and upbeat,
Mhm.
but we forgot to put the laundry in, and he needs his work shirt for tomorrow. Shoot, yeah, I meant to, really, honey, I meant to. It was not malicious. I was not trying to passive aggressive. I just forgot, so we have to look at our weaknesses and say, if my spouse is something else, how might my weaknesses be irritating him or her? How might my little, things that I struggle with be challenging for them to deal with? And just understanding that, like having that understanding encourages us and shows us that there's hope here. They have their strengths, they have their weaknesses, likewise we have them. So leaning into our strengths and even relying on their strengths. If you know that your spouse is going to be really good at something, if you have a melancholic spouse and he's going to be really detailed and take care of this, ask him to take care of that thing, whatever it is. If you have a phlegmatic spouse, maybe you want to say, honey, maybe you could talk to our parents about this problem because I know I'm going to get all worked up. I'm going to get excited, but you're phlegmatic and you can handle this calmly. Let's talk about it ahead of time, make sure we're on the same page, but then maybe you could talk to them because it just will be so much better. So you see how you can use their strengths as well as your own strengths because now the two are one. So now
Mhm.
you've got double strengths. You've got your strengths and you've got his strengths, and you can work together and say, how can we be better parents? How can we Sometimes you have to talk about it on that level before you say, "So I read this book and I figured out that this is what you are. And here's what's wrong with you. And here's what you need to work on." Like, it's not probably the best way to start. But if you could get together with him or her and say, "Let's talk about, I've noticed you're really good at this. And I think I'm pretty good at this. How can we use that together to have a better marriage or better parenting or whatever it is you want to particularly focus on?"
No, I love that, and I think it's so important to be able to utilize the positive things before we jump on the negative things, and certain temperaments are obviously more predisposed to those situations, so it's important to, like, check yourself on that, and in my own experience, I have found myself taking strengths from my husband and trying to implement them in myself, so, for example, he always thought through things very carefully. perfectionist, very like, I wanna make sure we make the right decision. I've always just been like, "Ah, whatever, it's good enough," type of mentality. And so being able to actually take time to think about a decision has saved me so much pain in the long term with certain things, and actually being able to think through things and stay on task is something I was never very good with until I married him, and then I saw him being able to stay on task and really think things through, really take things seriously. And then I'm like, oh, I should do that too. So almost taking certain things from other temperaments has also kind of helped me figure out how to balance my own temperament in a way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. How long have you been married?
It'll be a year on June 8th.
Oh, congratulations. That's
Thank
so
you.
awesome.
Learning
Yeah.
curves, we're always constantly
Oh,
learning things about each other, and the temperaments was something that we just learned about each other, and we both were just like, "This makes so much sense." We've never ever had, like, an argument that we've never been able to work out. Like, we've always been able to work our way out of it. We've always been able to probably communicate too much, but there's never too much communication, and really figure out each other's perspective and understand where we're coming from, and also now adding our temperaments into the mix. I mean, it's a whole other level of understanding each other, and it has been so helpful in moments where I automatically know how my husband will react in a situation and how I can either make that worse or I can make it better. And I think that is a complete game changer when you actually know the temperament of your spouse, because if they're choleric and something happens that upsets them, it's not going to be very helpful if you're like, "Well, what are you upset about? Like, I've been doing this all day. What are you t—" in that you need to be the opposite. It's like if they're upset about something, "What happened? Like, tell me about it. Do you wanna talk about it? I'm here for you." And being able to, instead of feed the vice, learn how to feed the virtue in that person.
oh, I love that. Feed the virtue.
I don't know.
Yes, that's
My
good. That's good. I like it.
people are allowed to steal that. I don't know. But I also see, you mentioned parenting. And I've babysat for over 12 years. I babysat one family for over 8. And learning about temperaments, I see the temperament in each one of them. People think like, "Oh, they're siblings, like they're raised the same way." They're all different. They are so different. And as a parent, I feel like learning your child's temperament is gonna be a complete game changer. What kind of advice would you have for parents who are trying to figure out their child's temperament, and just trying to figure out, how do I raise a choleric? How do I raise a sanguine?
Yes. Well, first, I would just like to say I am so excited for you that you have learned so much about communication and the temperaments in your first year of marriage. That is awesome. I've
Thank
been
you.
married 30 years, and I just think it's so incredibly admirable that you're doing so much with this right in the first year.
Thank you.
Just getting to know each other, just getting to understand where the other one is coming from. And yes, of course, we can apply it to kids. I also babysat a lot before I was married, and so it all came naturally when I became a mom. That it was like, oh yeah, this is I got this. This is what you know. So it's a great experience to babysit. So yes, if we can discern the temperament of our child, and a lot of times it starts showing right in the crib, like right away. That choleric child is trying to run things from the crib, or that sanguine child just wants to make you smile, just wants your attention, just wants constant. Sanguines want constant attention. It's just how we are. We have to work on that. Sometimes other people get the spotlight. Um, the melancholic baby takes things so seriously and worries about things, and just has, like, my melancholic daughter just like had this concerned look on her face at a couple of months old, and she'd have her bottle and she'd have her toy and she'd be relatively satisfied, but she'd just have this little perplexed look on her face, like,
Aw.
what is going on in this world around me? And you had to work a little more for her smile. And then the phlegmatic baby, a friend of mine had a phlegmatic baby, little David, and my husband said, "That baby is emotionless. Like, he never cries, but he doesn't laugh either. He just looks completely placid and just." I'm like, "Yes, that is a phlegmatic baby." Just and if you're blessed with a phlegmatic baby first, and then you have a choleric baby, you're like, "What the heck happened? I thought I was such a great parent." It's because that phlegmatic baby was really easy. So so yes, we can apply this and we can say, okay, again, not pigeonholing, not okay, this kid is always going to do this because they're not. There's going to be environment that affects them. There's going to be their companions that affect them, the other kids they're playing with, their other siblings, all those kind of things. But at least we can see again where their tendency lies, where the
Mm,
weakness in their armor lies, that for a sanguine child, they're going to be a people pleaser. And that can make them follow someone down the wrong path just because they want to please and they want to be popular. If we have a melancholic child, we know that they're going to tend to brood on their hurts. My brother hurt me yesterday, and I just don't think I can forgive him. That would be a very melancholic statement. The choleric would just punch him out, which would be something else to work with. But the melancholic would, like, harbor that hurt and brood on it and lay awake at night, and you think you've tucked them into bed and everything's taken care of, but that melancholic is still laying in bed thinking about it. I had a brother like that. And then you have the phlegmatic child can be sort of run over by the other kids. I had a choleric brother who was one day I looked out the window and the choleric brother was lowering the phlegmatic brother out the barn window,
oh,
and I
no.
like, you don't have to do everything the choleric brother tells you to do. You can say no. You don't have to. He's like, oh, it's okay. It's all right. Yeah, but you could have broken your neck.
Typical. Yep.
So understanding that, and certainly if you have multiple children, understanding the choleric one is probably bossing the other ones. And maybe you can use that. Maybe you can say, okay, I'm going to the grocery store. I need to leave Johnny in charge, or I need to leave Mary in charge because she will get things done. I've talked to families that their oldest is not a temperament that's good at leadership. And
Mm,
so when they leave the house, they leave the second one in charge because the second one will actually make sure that the baby doesn't fall out the upper story window.
important.
Um, and so just knowing that about your kids helps, just like knowing about it with your spouse. And then knowing what this child is going to be most struggling with, and what their strengths are. So what you can do to motivate a child is going to vary based on their temperament. Not everyone will be motivated by a sticker chart, but
Mm,
a sanguine might because it's colorful and it's fun and I want to please you and I want to have all those pink and purple stickers on my chart. So, and that will also probably motivate a choleric because they want achievement and recognition of their achievement. So, but a phlegmatic is probably going to be like, I don't need stickers. I
that's
didn't do
me.
my chores because I don't need stickers. I don't want stickers. So it just, I don't know, it's exciting to think I could learn more about my kid. I could learn more about my spouse, and then I could apply that in ways to, like you said, feed virtue and battle vice within our families, and then spread that outward, right? So then it applies to your mother in law, and then it applies to your neighbors, and it applies to the people at church, and on and on and on it goes, so that we can blanket it all in charity.
Mhm.
Charity covereth a multitude of sins. Not as an excuse, oh, well, that person is choleric. They're just going to be difficult their whole lives. No, no, they should be working on that. But at least you can understand they're struggling with something that you as a sanguine phlegmatic just don't struggle with. You don't have that temptation to run all over everybody and tell everyone what to do and pull them all into your master plan and battle with them when they don't want to be in your master plan. That's just not something you're going to struggle with. Um, I get excited about it.
No, I would too. I mean, it's just so interesting because I feel like it can cover so many different areas of our lives that we just for the longest time, we've always just been like, "Oh, that's just how they are." Like, that's just how they are because they were raised a certain way. Or you see constantly on social media, these influencers who are saying like, "Oh, well, I was raised to become a people pleaser because my mom, like, did X, Y, and Z, so then I just learned, oh, love is conditional or something." But I'm like, take your temperament into consideration, though. Take
Yes.
into account your mother's temperament. And a lot of people think that firstborns are choleric because they're headstrong, bossy. That's usually the typical, "Oh, that's the oldest." But I've met oldest kids who are very much so melancholic or sanguine, and the second born is actually the choleric, or, or even, I mean, depending on it, phlegmatic, depending. But for the most part, you hear, like, the oldest is the bossy one and the youngest is the crazy one, and I'm like, "Well, maybe they're just both caloric."
Yes.
Rest in peace to the parents with 2 caloric babies.
Now you and I just met today, so you don't know this, but I'm the oldest.
Okay.
And when I first took the temperament test when I was 16 years old, it came out as sanguine choleric. And I thought, "Oh, okay, that's what I am." And as I've gotten older, I feel like I'm not as choleric. Like I don't need to be the one in charge. I don't want to run the committee unless I needed, that
Mm.
kind of thing. And my spiritual director said to me when I said something about being sanguine choleric, he said, "Sanguine choleric? That's not what you are." And I said, "Really? What do you think I am?" And he said, "Sanguine melancholic." And
Mm.
I had studied more about how our temperament is affected by the people we are around. And it came up exactly what you were saying, that as
Oh.
an oldest child, I was put into a position of authority and I was told things that made me act in a more choleric way. Now, that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that was a problem. It's just that I behaved in a choleric way because that was what was required of me. I was 6 years older than my next sibling. So I was left in charge a lot. And so I
Mm.
had to step into that. And I remember my parents saying things to me like, "You're the oldest, you have to set a good example." Well, you tell a child that enough times, they're going to behave that way. They're going to say, "Oh, I have to be in this position of authority." Or, "You're the oldest, I'm leaving you in charge. Make sure that the boys do their chores," or whatever. Well, that may not have been my temperament, but I stepped into that because I was a people-pleasing sanguine and I wanted to please my parents. So I started exhibiting these choleric traits. And you just be aware of it. It's not a bad thing. Sometimes you're put in, like, you're when you're running your business here as the religious hippie, you have to make decisions for your business and you have to be consistent with your podcast releases, and you have to do these things that may not come naturally to you as a sanguine. So you may behave in a more choleric way when you're working on your business, and that's okay. That's good as long as we're picking up the strengths and not picking up the weaknesses of those temperaments and becoming a bossy older sister or a domineering boss or whatever, just because we're picking up those traits.
Mm. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And so, would you say that technically we're all born with a specific temperament, right? So, but certain outside situations, environments can make us kind of mask as a different temperament until we really actually figure out who we are and kind of lean into that. So we don't actually change temperaments at all. We're still our own temperament, but we just kind of grow into it. That's kind of like what you were saying.
Yes, literally, we can mask. And I'm not talking right now about abusive situations. I'm just talking about regular family life.
Mhm.
If you have an older brother who's choleric, you may say, if I buck him, he's going to beat me up.
Ooh.
He's going to lock me in my room and tell mom that I did blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to make sure that I don't buck him. So I'm going to be more quiet. I'm going to just keep my opinions to myself, even though I have strong opinions too. That's just an example of a child masking, or sometimes it's something like the parents are very outgoing. Maybe a choleric is married to a sanguine, and now they have this melancholic child who's this deep thinker and this introvert, and they may become a great violinist because a lot of times melancholics are good at music, and but they don't want to be up in front of people performing, but they do it to please the parents. And so
Mm.
they become this great performer and they're like, "Wow, you must be sanguine because you're this great performer." No, they were doing it because they were trying to please their parents. And that's fine. That's fine. That's normal. This is what happens. What we want to do is cultivate the strengths of all four temperaments. So just like you were saying about noticing the strengths of your husband and trying to imitate those strengths, we're supposed to be doing that with all four temperaments. Find what our predominant fault is, what the thing is that we struggle with the most, and then say, "Okay, what is the opposing virtue that I need to cultivate?" A priest told me a long time ago, because I was getting too melancholic about my spiritual life. Stop focusing on pulling up the weeds and start focusing on planting flowers.
Oh,
It's
that's
like,
sweet.
it's true though. We have to, oh, I lost my temper again. I screamed and yelled and da da da. Okay. But if you just keep thinking about that, I got to stop losing my temper. I got to stop losing it. Instead, start cultivating meekness. Look at
Mm,
meekness. It's the opposite virtue to anger. And say, how can I plant the flower of meekness in my soul? I think I
right.
got
No,
off
that's
track from your
beautiful.
question, but anyway.
No, that's beautiful though, and I think also it helps because there are, like, people who struggle with scrupulosity, and certain temperaments, I feel, like melancholic, are more like, they're more in like, they're more likely to fall into that if they're
Yes.
not careful, and just because you have scrupulosity doesn't mean you are melancholic, but it can. So learning about your temperament, I do feel like can really help you not only in your spiritual life, your prayer life, and how to better connect with God, but also in all aspects of your life, your relationships. Like we were saying, if you have a choleric mother that you just could never stand your entire life, and then you realize, oh, she's choleric, and I'm, something else, sanguine, something else. It makes sense why we always clashed heads. But
Yes.
here are some strengths she has, if you can point out strengths, or here are how this is how I can love her at a distance. And I think a lot of people, if they stay wrapped up in oh, they do this and they do that, they focus on all the negativity.
Mhm.
Temperaments are will do that. Instead of looking for the positives or looking for the good things in people.
Mhm.
And sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes there might not be any good things, but you can still recognize that it's something that you can figure out through your own temperament and understanding their temperament. And again, very rare situations where that's the situation, because I do believe when you learn your parents' temperament, how they raised you is going to make so much more sense than just like, oh, my parents, were raised like this and that's why they raised me like this. It's like, no, it goes so much deeper than that. So this is just awesome. I'm so excited for people to get this book after listening to this podcast, and to learn their own temperament. Do you have any last words of advice for anyone who's trying to discover their temperament and um, maybe utilize their temperament?
Oh, well, like you said, I think it applies to everything. And it applies to our relationship with ourselves, our relationship to God. Sometimes we're looking at God with a melancholic aspect of he's just up there with a big stick waiting for me to make a mistake. Well, then you're probably looking at him as if he's a melancholic God. He is above all of that. He's a pure spirit. But even our Lord Jesus Christ, who took our human nature, he was the pinnacle of all the temperaments. He had the highest qualities of all four temperaments and none of the weaknesses. And so that's what we are going for. That's what we are aiming for, is to become closer and closer to the heart of Christ and not put our impressions of what he's like on him, and realize he is all perfect. He is kind, he is merciful, he is gentle. He has everything that we need. As the Litany of the Sacred Heart says, he's the source of all consolation. So we are doing all of this study, all the work you do, all the work I do is all to bring us to the heart of Christ. And if something is pulling us away from the heart of Christ, then we have to look at that and evaluate it and say, what's going on here? What do I need to give up in my life? What do I need to change in order to become closer and closer to the heart of Christ in everything we do?
That's beautiful. Yeah, I it's just such an amazing, I don't know, discovery in a way that I feel like even though it's become a trend, more people still need to know about this and actually take it seriously. Because I didn't for the longest time, and then the last couple months, I was like, you know what? Why not? Let me just see what I am and what my husband is, and then our relationship just got so much deeper, and our understanding of each other just grew so much more. And now it's like I couldn't imagine marriage without knowing our temperaments
I
truly.
love that.
And
I love it.
then when we have kids, it's like I'm gonna be like, "Okay, I know exactly how to do this," or I at least know what they're more predisposed to, and what their vices are going to be, to kind of help them through that, as opposed to, like, raising them all the same. It just
Yes.
doesn't really work that way. So, I'm very excited for this and for people to get this book. Thank you so much, Rosemary, for coming on and discussing this new book. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much. I hope that people will go on to Tan Books and find the book. They can also, yes, they can also find it anywhere books are sold. You can ask for it at Barnes and Noble, ask for it at your local Catholic bookstore, order it on Amazon. It's all out there. I hope you'll come and check out my website, rosemarymcguireberry.com, and follow me on Substack, rosemarymcguireberry.substack.com, and check me out on Instagram where I post Catholic travel photos at rosemary.writer. Thanks so
That is
much.
awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, we can have you back on sometime when you do the part 2 and we, chat again.
I would love it. Thanks, Amber.
Absolutely. With all that being said, guys, I put all those links in the description below so you guys can easily find Rosemary, and I will talk to you guys in the next episode. Bye.